Today, as promised, or perhaps threatened, in an earlier edition on Victor Pelevin, I'm going to talk about my bête noire author, who is China Mieville. These are the books of his that I've read, and I'm going to go through them one by one in order that I read them, not in order that they were published. So I'd never heard of China Mieville, probably because he's a genre writer, and I don't read a lot of genre. But I came across his name in a sort of raging debate online about why genre writers such as Mieville never get considered for literary prizes. And he has his sort of legions of fans, and one of the main beefs seems to be, well, he's a genre writer, and genre writers never get the credit they deserve because somehow they're not literary. And that set me thinking, well, there's no reason why a genre book can't aspire to high literary values. In the same way, there's no reason why work of literary fiction can't be a cracking good page turning read. So I thought, okay, I'll check out Mieville and come to my own conclusions. So I started with a book called The City and the City. You can see that. And the first half of the book, I was impressed. It sets up a world of a divided city, I think based on sort of the divisions in Yugoslavia or possibly the Berlin Wall. But it takes it a step further in that the very architecture of the city, where communities rub up against each other, they're sort of in separate enclaves, but the physical, there's a border between them at various places where one ends and the other begins. And the laws of that city actually embody the sort of the divide in the architecture, so that not only are you not allowed to sort of cross from one to the other, but you're not even allowed to look at someone from the other side. I think about different ethnicities, and the laws uphold that, and the architecture of the city upholds it in the sense that it makes it possible for you to sort of walk along a road that winds through parts of the other community, but somehow enables you not to have to look at them. And if you think that's a very strange thing, you can go to a part of North London called Stamford Hill, where there's a Hasidic Jewish community, where one of their rules is that men do not look at women who aren't their wife. So they differ, and this actually happened to my wife when she went up and stopped one of these guys to ask him the way because we were lost. And he was very polite and told us, but he actually shielded his head away from her so he didn't have to look at her. So this does go on. And the way the world is depicted in this is superb. The detail and the thought and the creativity and the imagination of it. And the story is a dead body has been found belonging to someone who's a part of one community, but the body's found in another. So that's already a transgression, apart from the fact that it's a murder. And so it's a detective novel. And the second half of the novel, all the inventiveness, all the imagination, it's been, Mieville has established the world of the city and the city. So there's nowhere for it to go, and it becomes just a very, slow-paced, uninvolving detective story. And very disappointing for all of that. Now, this is not unique to Mieville. One of my favourite writers is Jonathan Lethem, who wrote a book called Motherless Brooklyn, which, although the guy wasn't an actual detective, he plays detective. And the thing about him was he had Tourette's syndrome. So the first half of the book is there's amazing sort of explosions of language and unexpected words being paired with other words because of this guy's Tourette's. But the second half, it's just the detective novel as he solves and they get the guilty party in the same way as this does. And it's a shame because the books are sort of quite schizoid and there's all this sort of creativity and imagination, and then it kind of goes nowhere and devolves to plot and some sort of satisfaction of a story following through to the end for the reader. So that was his first book. So I thought, interesting. I'll definitely give him another go. See what another book is like. Which brought me to Kraken, and this book annoyed me so much for reasons that I'll go into that literally the next day that after I'd finished it, I sat down to see if you could write a literary genre work. And in the space of about 6 weeks, and no planning, I hadn't been sort of boiling up this particular idea, although a lot of the ideas in my book obviously must have been playing around in my head. So 6 weeks, start to finish, I'd finished my riposte in a way to this, and I'd written a genre novel that was, I thought, aspiring to literary standards. Okay, so back to the specifics of this book, why it annoyed me so much. There's an alternative or a parallel London, and it's populated by people with sort of magic powers and supernatural, a bit like the sort of the mutants in X-Men. And the first thing is that that world never really rubs up against the real London, the London that I live in. So you think, well, what's the point of that? Because they're battling for the heart and soul of London, but A, London is the other London's completely uninvolved in that, and B, you think, well, presumably this is going on in Tokyo and Paris and New York and St. Louis and Adelaide. You know, there are sort of people with supernatural powers living beneath the sort of awareness of the normal people. So the stakes are very high, and yet they're not, because normal London is unaware of what's going on. So that's the first thing. And it's a book about basically a gang war between different sort of magical beings, and some of those magical beings are fantastically sort of imagined. So, for example, one of the bad guys exists only as a tattoo on another guy's back. So it's a living tattoo, and it sort of spouts his orders and stuff, and is almost sort of untouchable because he sort of has an inbuilt disguise that no one knows where he is. And there's lots of stuff like that, which is sort of fascinating. And that's the sort of this sort of urban fantasy genre that Mieville sometimes gets tagged with. That he sort of comes up with these sort of fantastic urban sort of fantastical creatures with great powers, and but it's the imagination that he gives to them, and that takes them out of the everyday. So that's great. But then he sort of managed to destroy it, because in the end they succumb to very, very mundane, banal powers that do for them. And you just think, well, there's a mismatch of scale here. There's all this sort of menace and their great sort of magical powers. Yeah, it doesn't take anything terribly magical to undo them. So that sort of doesn't work very well. And then you begin to wonder, well, there's a lot of erudite stuff in here about religions, cults, beliefs, how people sort of follow blindly the sort of precepts of God and books, holy books, and all that kind of stuff. And I found that quite interesting, but it's a bit sort of Mieville talking at you rather than sort of embedding it in the form of his novel. And I just wondered that his urban fantasy fans are thinking, oh, this is too much. Let's get on to the next chase and the next fight scene. And again, there's some interesting stuff in here. There's what he does with language and dialogue. He has these sort of villainous characters, and he gives them each a very different sort of patois or lingo. So, for example, one speaks like a sort of Dickensian villain. Others speak like the 1970s British cop the Sweeney, and that sort of TV slang, and that's great. I mean, I love that. But it's quite, that is literary, and you think, yeah, that's why people are sort of saying this guy should be considered as a literary writer. But equally, you think his genre fans probably get a bit sort of, what's all this? This is nonsense. We take us on to the next sort of fight scene or the next incredible creature. So I got the feeling with this that it needed a really strict editor, that Mieville had just thrown all this creative stuff, all these stuff from his imagination, just sort of threw it against the wall and said, okay, you sort it out. What takes for you as the reader is great. I'm not going to sort it out. And it's sort of like a cat who brings you a dead mouse and sort of plays with it and then walks off and forgets about it, and then brings another, catches another one and brings it. And that's what I felt about this. As I say, it annoyed me so much I went out and wrote a book. So that was that one. And then we came to Undone. Again, set in London. Unlike this, which I think is a very loving portrayal of London. I mean, Mieville obviously, has great feelings towards this city. The setting of this, I couldn't see why it was set in London at all. It's basically, again, like the city, like Kraken, it's a shadow or a parallel London. This one made up of all the detritus and rubbish that the real London generates, creates an alternative London. So broken umbrellas come to life and all this kind of thing. And this parallel London is under threat from an enemy called the Smog. And that's fine as a setup. I've got no problems with that. The problem with this book is that it's just plot driven. You know, there's no emotionality. The main character is a cardboard cutout of a young girl who has no emotional range at all. And it's just every sort of crisis that she finds herself in gets resolved by a ridiculous act of deus ex machina. Very similar to this, where lots of sort of seemingly impossible to escape scenarios were resolved by deus ex magica, some magical spell or whatever. But this doesn't have that. This just, it's not even magic really that rescues her from these situations. And this reads like a kid's book to me. And I just felt completely infantilized by it. And maybe it is a kid's book. I don't know. I mean, I'll be honest with you. It was in a box of books that some nieces of mine gave to us to pass on to my sons who are younger. So maybe it is for teenagers. But anyway, I loathed this. And then we come to the rescue, the salvation of China Mieville, Embassy Town. So Mieville is quite adept at moving between different genres. So urban fantasy, new weird, which is very much associated with him, and his label I think doesn't need to exist, which I'll come to. So he writes science fiction. So he can move along through these different genres. This is science fiction, but it's genuinely literary and genuinely mesmerizing, I think. So it's a planet at the end of the universe, and it's colonized by humans. But the existing species who live on it, they are fed by language. Language nurtures them and helps them grow and develop and stay healthy and all of that. And the only way for human beings to be able to understand that language, because it's so nuanced and so layered, so intricate, is that two human beings, known as ambassadors, have to physically link in order to be able to cope with all the different sort of intricacies of the host language, which is a great idea. And this is a great study of language and how language works and functions. And the plot of the book is that basically that language, that host language, is being corrupted and threatens both the humans and their ambassadors, but also threatens the hosts as well, because it's possibly it's a force for revolution in changing the nature of the relationship of the host to the humans, but also of the host themselves and how they think and function and stuff. So it's a brilliant study, and the difference between this and the other books is Mieville leashes himself in, he reins himself in, and he sticks to the world that he's built rather than moving off to some other sort of great creation, which he sort of then throw against the canvas. And this would get in my all-time, certainly within my all-time top 10 science fiction books, but it would probably even get in my all-time top 20 books. This is wonderful. And you think, this is the exasperation of Mieville. He can do it. He's certainly got all the tools because he's a brilliant, creative, imaginative thinker. He obviously understands and he is interested in big concepts about politics and things, even going back to the city of the city. He has appreciation for language and linguistics. He has a good ear, such as the dialogue in Kraken, but he rarely brings it all together. But in this book, he does. So, on to the last one of his I read, which was recently published, called The Last Days of the New Paris. And I thought, okay, there was a book in between called Rail C something. I think maybe just called Rail C, which I haven't read. So this is a novella that came out, and I had quite high hopes of it after Embassy Town. You hope that Embassy Town is the point at which he's reached, from which he can only go further and not sort of regress. But unfortunately, he does regress, I feel, in this. So basically, the Second World War did not finish in 1945. It's a parallel universe. The Nazis, in league with the devils from hell, are fighting the French resistance, who have their own allies, which I'll come to, in Paris. So it's occupied by the Nazis, but the French resistance are, make it very hard for them. And the French resistance are joined, allied by surrealist images. So the conceit is that images from surrealist art have been brought to life and are fighting on the side of the French resistance. And it's a great it's a great idea, and he explains why they came to life and all of that. And there's lots of reference to specific works of surrealist art. So you think, okay, ideas wise, what this seems to be saying is Nazis who sort of talked about degenerate art and sort of purity, and obviously some surrealist art which involves sort of collage work and bringing together sort of found elements in the world to sort of to build these creatures, is the exact opposite of that, because it's like a miscegenation, which obviously the Nazis were against. So that's in there, but it's never really developed, disappointingly, I think. Instead, what you get here is you get no modulation, you get no emotion, you just get description, description, description. So for each scene, and considering this is in a war, nobody really dies, there's no consequence, there's no real description of pain. You don't care, it doesn't feel like a war. And the two main characters, who have no human emotion in them whatsoever, they're just observing machines. And Mieville moves them from one place in Paris to another in order to encounter the next, great foe. And they're on the, they know the Nazis are sort of unleashing this sort of, the weapon to win the war, which obviously echoes real history. But they're not talking about rocket, jet propelled rockets and things. In this book, it's a sort of Nazi's own sort of version of a sort of miscegenated beast to counteract the surrealist beasts. And when you come to it towards the end, you just get a description heavy of what this sort of monstrosity beast is, how they defeat it, and in defeating it, they then unleash the real worst monstrosity beast, which is the second weapon, and then they manage to defeat that again, improbably, and then we all go home. And that's the novel. And you just think, what a disappointment. There's just nothing, despite all the the richness of the ideas and the concept, there's just nothing. There's no literary values at all. Even the plot is leaden. And then right at the end, there's an afterword, which is very strange, where Mieville's written a piece with him as this guy who has to, as the writer, who goes into a hotel room to meet this mystery guy who claims to have lived the story of the rest of the book. And he talks about it in real terms. There's all the strange things in this book that are described really happened. And you think, well, what's the point of that? Is Mieville trying to argue that this really happened, or is he trying to sort of send the whole thing up as ridiculous fiction? And I really didn't understand or appreciate the need for that. So, 5 books, not all of his by any means, because he's written a heck of a lot. One is brilliant. The City in the City is so-so. 2 a complete dreck, which is Kraken and Undone. And then The Last Days of the New Paris, you just think, this is why you are not considered for literary prizes, because you're not a literary writer, even though you have all the literary tools and all the mental capacity to be considered a literary writer. Somewhere along the process, you don't execute it. I don't know if that's because of your audience that you perceive and you want to write for them, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But then that audience are wrong to be claiming literary values for this. I just think I think he could be such an important writer, and for me, I just think he's the most exasperating writer, and I don't know if I'm going to read any more of his works after these. I may do, but I may not. So, China Mieville, I've battled with you, and I think we both lost. Okay, till next time.